think it's starting recording, and yes, it has started recording. So obviously I'll edit some of this out, but oh yes, welcome one and all. Here we are on another podcast, and for those of you watching on YouTube, yes, you can see me, yes, in Technicolor Dreamcoat. And today I have a very special guest who's none other as from quite a interesting background, if I may say, and I'm sure she would agree as well, but currently a director of content at a number of companies and also editor of a magazine, and has navigated her way in, this is from in her own words, has navigated away from being a pub manager. That's right, a pub manager. And for those of you in the US, that's a bar. From a pub manager to a mature student where she studied cognitive neuroscience, and has worked her way to a marketeer. So hello, Sarah Brandis.
Hello, how you doing?
Yes, and welcome to the show. So yes, I've mentioned in terms of the work that you do, director of a number of content for companies. If you want to explain just a little bit about yourself, your company that you work for, what it's all about, and you.
Okay. And me. So I'm 38, I live in London, and I work remotely for a company based in the US. Well, two companies really. So Innate Vitality is our health brand, and Make Your Mark Global is our publishing brand. And both companies are owned by my mentor and boss, who is Dr. Andrea Pennington, who, if you're in the US, you might know her from Discovery Health and Oprah, Dr. Oz. If you're in the UK, you probably know her TED Talks best, or maybe her books. So I've been working with Andrea for a few years now, and helped to build these companies with her, which we're really excited about, because I get to do the content, which is my passion. It means I get to talk about running sometimes. I've been trying to sneak it into Innate Vitality magazine here and there, but that's really what I'm focused on at the moment, is just content creation.
Brilliant. So you're doing stuff as opposed to just talking about, so creating content. In the old school, I think, having come from a manufacturing background myself, you make stuff, yeah? You're making content, yeah? For people to digest, so which is really good. What's the best way for people to contact you? You mentioned your company, and in terms of what you say, what's the best way for people if they wanted to contact you from listening to what you have to say on this podcast? What's the best way to contact you?
Gosh, so I have a million Instagram accounts. Yeah.
What is the best one to find you on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook?
Yeah,
what's the best one?
You can find me on Instagram at Running With My Mind. That's my most used personal account of the many ones that exist. Yeah, best to talk to me there.
Running With My Mind. I'll put a link on the description on there. But also, you have a YouTube's, don't you? Is it a YouTube account? Running With My Mind?
A very new YouTube channel. It was Andy, Forest of Dean Runner, that inspired me. Do you remember the film he released earlier in 2019, where he did a big cinematic experience of his marathon time attempt? It was that one. After watching that, I was just so emotional at the end of it, and I was like, I want to create these things too. So I set up a YouTube channel for running.
Excellent. So yeah, we're going to be talking about, as you mentioned, about running with my mind. So it's all about being mindful, mental health awareness, and running for that. And I mentioned, and when you did reach out, you saying you wanted to share your experiences of how running and mental health awareness and how the two come together and work for you. So the floor is yours, as I say, Sarah. Tell us about your experiences and what you want to share with the world.
Sure. Well, the thing that I most want to say about the link between running and mental health is that it's a fine line that you can overstep. There's this general assumption that the more exercise you do, the more endorphins that you release in your brain and body, the better you're going to feel. But from my own experience, I found that if you take it too far, if you you know that saying that the way that you do one thing is the way that you do everything.
Right. Yeah.
I'm quite an all or nothing person, and in the past that's helped me get forward in my career. But also applying that all or nothing approach to running ended up sort of tipping it over. So from from running being something that was just my fun sport, that was healthy, that was good for my mental health, that was good for my physical health. There have been times where I've gone completely overboard, and then running has become another stick to beat myself with, another thing that's about perfectionism and attainment, and just, you know, not resting when you should rest, and self-judgment, all the bad stuff, all the stuff that we at Innate Vitality are telling you to avoid, and to instead embrace self-love and self-compassion and be gentle with yourself. And so that's been part of my journey, and I just really want to share that message to say, if you are someone that's that way inclined, be mindful of it, because you want to make sure that you check yourself every now and again and make sure that your sport is still your sport and not another form of self-punishment.
Right. Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know about yourself, but for me, it's a hobby, and I think a hobby, it's essential that we're actually enjoying the hobby, rather than just punching ourselves through. So how did you go from? Because I remember reading in terms of your bio that your first marathon was New York Marathon. What a way to start, eh? And you said that the time that you completed in, you didn't feel worthy of a medal. Do you want to what made you think that way? Because completing a marathon, I have to say, you said you completed it in 5 hours, which is an astonishing time, but yet you didn't feel worthy of a medal finishing in 5 hours. Why did you think you had those thoughts?
Well, it really says a lot about my mindset at the time, like my general mental health. This was 2009, so just over 10 years ago. Actually, you know, the Instagram 10-year challenge, it just came up on that. It's like, oh, wow. New York, wow. I wasn't a runner when I signed oh yeah. I wasn't a runner when I signed up for this is not just my first marathon, but my first running thing. I was just having an existential crisis at the age of, I don't know, 27, something like that. Don't make me do maths. Anyway, I was younger. I was running a bar. I hated my job. I thought my life was going nowhere. Me and my friend Matt drunkenly agreed to do a marathon together. Just randomly, just like, we need a goal. What should we do? Let's do a marathon. We were full of cider. And the next morning, Matt, with a hangover, just started like weaseling out of it. Oh, I'm not built for running. I can't do a marathon. Oh, my head hurts. And I was just like, that's lame. I'm up for it. I'm going to change my life. So I got online, such as it was in 2009, very slow internet, and I just looked up marathons, and I had no idea really what a marathon was. I didn't know it was 26.2 miles. I found New York. I found a company called 209 Events who offered package deals, so they would like book your place, book your accommodation, hold your hand, take you to the start line. And I thought, that's probably a really good idea because I'll get lost by myself in New York. So I took it. I just did it. And then race day comes around, and I've trained, but I've not trained well because I'm not a runner. I've managed to squeeze in one half marathon just to make sure that I've got some vague concept of the distance and that I can actually put one foot in front of the other. Things you do when you're young. If I tried to do this now, I would just drop dead. But being in my 20s, I managed to run a marathon with very little training, and I got around it in 5 hours. But because I knew nothing of running, I didn't understand how long a marathon typically takes. I didn't know what good training looked like. I just set myself this arbitrary time goal of 4 hours based on nothing more than I'd heard somebody mention it. And I was like, I should do that. So I turn up to the start line thinking I'm going to do this in 4 hours. And then when reality hit me, about halfway, I realized I was half an hour off my time goal, and I finished in 5 hours, which, considering how little I knew about running, it's actually pretty good. But I'd beaten myself up so much at that point, from the halfway mark to all the way to the end. I was beating myself up in my head. You're failing, you're failing. That, with the fact that I was in the sort of pain that I'd never felt before because I had no idea about running. You know, when everything hurts and you were just so emotional about it. I just beated myself up so badly that by the time I got to the finish line, I was in such a depressed state that I almost swerved the medals. Like, I hesitated. I was like, shall I get it? Shall I not get it? I don't know. I don't feel like I deserve it. I got it anyway. I'm really glad that I did. I've still got it now, and I'd be really sad if I didn't have it. But I felt awful about it. Didn't celebrate afterwards. Didn't enjoy anything about it. On the flight home the next day, the other runners were trying to talk some sense into me, and I was like, no, it's not good enough. I've got to do another marathon. So I signed up for my next one. But actually that turned out to be the best thing, because I started to get into running and started to join the community, started to learn about running. and things started to change.
Wow. Oh, I was going to say that's an incredible experience. I can see from the emotion in your voice, and also in terms of seeing you here live on the Skype. But for those on the podcast, obviously you can't see this, but hey, I can see it obviously touched you there, and it's quite incredible how many people even today go into a marathon that way. Which is quite surprising. You'd think that maybe they would do a bit of research or look into the background, because I think that there might be some people who maybe, and I'm sure there's plenty out there, might be some people listening here think, oh, there's nothing to it, and 26.2 miles of a marathon is a long way. Do you often get that question, if you're doing a marathon? Which was your second marathon, by the way?
Oh, well, it was meant to be Blackpool, but then I got injured, so it ended up being Brighton 2011. So there was a 2-year gap.
So when you were running Brighton, or if you're looking to run Blackpool Marathon, did you ever get that question? Oh, how far is it?
Oh, I still get that now. Yeah. Or if I say I'm training for a 10K, someone's like, "Oh, marathon training."
Here in the UK, they say, "Is it the same distance as London?" Yeah, the clue is in the word marathon. 100 meters, it's 100 meters, whether it be in Zurich or Lausanne or London or New York, it's 100 meters. So 26.2 miles. Okay, the route is different, but yeah, so you went from there, and you say it's fascinating listening to people, and how sometimes, because for a lot of people who may not understand this, and for some they find it difficult to comprehend, why would someone want to beat themselves up having finished such an epic distance? And sometimes do you think it's because obviously you'd set that goal, which was just arbitrary, of 4 hours, and once you hadn't hit that, you're sort of thinking, oh, I'm a failure. It's how do you think we can, and maybe this is where, with the work that you're doing, how do you think we can help people?
Yeah, well, this is where psychology and neuroscience comes in. And one of the things that I love so much about it is our mindset and the way that we think is usually developed in childhood. They say that the most 7 years of your childhood, the first 7 years, of your childhood development are the most plastic. So that's when your brain does the most forming and learning. And then the things that you've learned when you're a little kid tend to stick with you in one format or another, and not necessarily in a logical way. So if you've been, say, 6 years old, and your mean auntie has said to you that you'll never amount to anything when you grow up, when you're 26, you know that she was just a mean old drunk and you shouldn't have listened to her. Yet that voice has been echoing, bouncing around your neurons, reinforcing them over many years, and it's still a belief. And but yeah, you can definitely get past that. It's about relearning the truths, and whether that's starting with therapy, talking it out, finding out where the root causes of your negative beliefs are. So that mean drunk aunt, for example, when you were 6, you might discover her through therapy and be like, oh yeah, I remember what Auntie Susan said, what a cow. And then you can start to look at where that's playing out in your life. Where am I listening to the voice of Auntie Susan rather than listening to reason? And then you start looking at your life with a bit of perspective, and you look for evidence of, actually, I have amounted to something. I've done this, I've done that, I'm capable of more. And you start to reinforce looking at the positives rather than negatives. Sounds really simplistic, and in some ways it is. It doesn't have to be complicated.
No, I mean, that's brilliant. And obviously, as someone who's studied the cognitive neuroscience, and obviously it's all about the mind, the words that you've just used echoes with me. I mean, it sounds simple because it is, but it's making that conscious decision, as you've just said, I think, in reinforcing that we are doing something good and meaningful. And in terms of when you were describing it, I mean, I remember vividly the first time I put some shoes on to go for a run, because I'd committed to doing a race for a friend of mine's charity, and I couldn't even get to the end of the street. But at no point did I feel a failure as a person. I felt a failure as not being able to run, but I didn't feel an overall failure, because at the end of the day, it just means, oh, I can't run. So to me, it's not the end of the world. But I think for some people, it's framing that and thinking, well, you might fail at a particular attempt, but you can relearn. And obviously from now is adding those little bits, and me getting to the end of the street without breaking down in knee aching, whatever. I saw that as an achievement, so I put that as a rubber stamp. So what you said, without me realizing it, is I'm reinforcing the positives. And so but you'd say you'd ran a half marathon just to make sure you could get round. What was that first half marathon, and how did that go? Did you go through the same mental bashing that you did as at New York? What was your? I'm digging down into
so it was quite a long time ago. What was the
first half marathon?
It was the Bournemouth Bay run, so not
Bournemouth
the Bournemouth
Bay.
half marathon. It was Bournemouth Bay half, which is a different company, I think, different time of year. Very hilly, very hilly.
Wow.
I got round in 2:15,
which was a very respectable time.
I think that was just being young. I think just youth on my side, because as I've got older, I've got slower. Like if I got 2:15 now, I'd be so happy. No, I think it was just being young and excited, and I don't remember beating myself up on that day at all. I was just enjoying it. It was sunny. I was full of endorphins, and I hadn't got to New York yet, so I wasn't on my A goal. And by the sea,
Bournemouth is beautiful. So if you ever get the chance to run by the sea, it's beautiful. Which leads me. I was segueing into by the seaside, Brighton. So your second marathon, obviously it was my first, Brighton. I think that's where we probably connected through the social meds. Is that?
I think that was my first video of yours I watched.
Yeah, Brighton Marathon was my first marathon. How was your first? You've ran Brighton a number of times now, though, haven't you?
Twice, yeah. Just
your first 2019 was your latest one, just gone. But your first one, 2011, you said was Brighton. And for a lot of people listening to this and watching this, probably myself included, the thought of running, I would have laughed. So you're obviously trailblazing. So how did Brighton go, and was it, because what it is now, it is I think Manchester might have just slightly overtaken as the second biggest, but at the time I ran it, Brighton was the second biggest in Britain. So at the time you ran it, my guess is it still would have been the second biggest in Britain. Was it a big deal? Did it start at the same park as it does now?
It was quite new. It did start at Preston Park, but it didn't have the fancy setup that it has now. The event village was just centered around the very small toilet block, so there were a lot of annoyed people queuing and holding it.
So the event village was the toilets.
Pretty much, just hanging around the toilet block. Lots of people were like annoyed queuing, but
anyone, the Brighton Marathon organizer, get into the events village is huge and it's amazing now. It's completely
beautiful.
Different. So it's amazing.
It's so lovely now. Good job in 2019, guys. It was fantastic. So
how was that second marathon for you? How did you go through the similar things, or you say you prepared better training? And again, for those listening, maybe the experience Sarah has gone through, Sarah, New York, and then from learning that, what did you learn and how did you change getting to Brighton?
Yeah, I was definitely in a slightly better headspace. Aside from running, in my private life, I had left a marriage and I was in a new relationship. So I had a slightly nicer boyfriend who actually waited for me at the finish line, whereas the husband did not come to New York. I was on my own. So I had support, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Because I think if you struggle with negative mindset, when you're alone, all you've got to listen to is your negative mindset. Whereas if you're with people that you know and trust, and they tell you, and they reinforce you, no, you did good, then you can be like, okay, yay, let's go have a beer and fish and chips and celebrate. So, and that's what happened. So I don't remember a great deal of the race. It's all a bit of a painful blur. But I did remember it was beautiful. I loved that, even though it's really awfully hilly, that bit up to Ovingdean and back, which is just headland. Beautiful. But I do remember the ending, because one of my friends was running along before it was so crowded that you can't move. They were running along the side to keep up with me as I was finishing. I did get overtaken by a guy in a full fluffy guide dog suit, and I was a bit annoyed about that. And a barefoot Jesus, he overtook me as well. But
did he have a crucifix a cross with him? No.
Didn't. No, just the hair, the robes, and the bare feet, but no cross. But I remember finishing, and I remember finishing happy and not beating myself up. And my time was 4:41, so it was like 4 something, and I was at that point I'd let go of the 4-hour goal. I was like, okay, that's clearly undoable, so let's just be happy with what we get. And I was happy.
Hey, never say never, Sarah. With
it's still there. It's still there. One day I'll get some more.
anything anything is possible within reason, but obviously, as I think you've probably said it, you have to believe it yourself. So that is quite a change from there. And you say you finished happy and you had people. And for the non-British listeners, is I love that you said you finished, you had a beer and fish and chips, which when you go to Brighton, you know, being it's almost a traditional British thing is the fish and chips, but especially when you're on a seaside resort, and Brighton is one of the top seaside resorts in Britain. So I love the fact that you said,
yeah,
fish and chips.
I've got to say, 2019, big up the organisers again. Right in the Finnish village, on the way out after you get your medal, you get an Erding alcohol-free beer. Yeah. And I've been looking forward to that since the power station at mile 20. I was so ready for that beer. It was lovely.
But yeah, fish and chips, what more do you want? So fast forward now from 2011 to 2019, so 8 years has changed. So your memory now of Brighton 2019 must be a bit more vivid, and I do recall we were having exchanges in 2018, because I think you signed up for Brighton. You were quite keen, weren't you? You signed up probably around 2018 early on.
Soon. Yeah, I'd just come back to running.
As soon as the tickets came up, I say tickets, whatever. You were on it, and you entered as in the first rush of entries, didn't you?
Yeah, early bird pricing. Nice. Yeah, no, I just got back on it because there was a big sort of 6 to 7 year hiatus where I wasn't running much. I'd decided to go back to uni as a mature student, so I was studying, I was working. I got really into my career, and I also got unhealthy, stressy, and put on a lot of weight. So I decided to come back big and do 2018. I got a London Marathon place through a local charity, which is the Blue Cross Animal Hospital. And then London Marathon was my big comeback. That was horrendous. That was my personal worst. That was the year of the heat wave. Do you remember the heat wave?
Yes, that was,
my goodness.
That was the one. That was the one I done.
It's awful, wasn't it?
It was a hot one. We'll talk. We'll fast back onto the London one, but but Brighton. So you'd ran London, and but Brighton. How did that compare then? You say you'd ran. Go ahead.
So last year, So at this point in my life, mental health wise, I'm coming back from being overweight and unhealthy and stressy, and I'm struggling a lot with anxiety. So race day for Brighton Marathon was difficult. I said in my email earlier, am I allowed to say puke on the podcast? I think it's too late.
You said it. Yeah.
So puked up my breakfast on the race day morning, which is not what you want, because you want to start with a full tank of fuel. Yeah. So I had a pretty empty stomach when I got to the start line, and just anxiety. It was just that I'd worked myself up, and I wasn't consciously, intentionally stressing about the finish time, but it was still in the back of my mind. It had got back in there again, that little voice of you need to be better, finishing isn't enough, you need to be better. So I'd got that playing in the back of my head, and I was so tense. Luckily I had a friend there. It was my friend Emma's first marathon, so she was nervous too, so we kind of distracted each other a bit at the start village. And then we started in different waves, and then I was on my own. And I remember getting to mile 8, where you're going uphill to Ovingdean again, and I felt a wave of vomit coming again. But I was in the middle of a pack of runners, and it was quite narrow, and there was nowhere to dart off to. So I ended up, when you throw up in your mouth a bit, you have to swallow it back down again. I couldn't puke on my shoes, and I couldn't puke on anyone else's shoes, because that's not a good move. So. Yeah, there was nowhere to go that I wouldn't have caused a pile up if I darted off. So I just had to.
In there, so
it wasn't the best. It kind of messed up my race plan. I was pretty desperate for the next water station to wash it all down, and then my race plan was just to take on the carb gels that I had with me. But because I was aware I had an empty stomach and empty muscles now, I was taking sweets from everyone that I passed. So thank goodness that there were people giving out sweets and fruit, and thank you 40 runners for the orange slices. That was really good. And I just got my way around and finished in 5 hours. So I was aiming for 4:20, but I puked. But do you know what? I was pretty happy with 5 hours, because considering that I had to be flexible and adapt the plan literally on the run, did okay, and I got my beer.
Absolutely. And of course it was another warm one, really, wasn't it? It was, it tends to be sunny, quite quite a lot of times. I mean, the times I was there, I've done it twice, and it's been sunny and hot on both days. But you mentioned London. I don't know whether you did mention that. I avoided it, but as you mentioned it, do you want to talk about that one? Because that was my first London, and yeah, you said it was the hot. Just for those, just to give a bit of context, 2018 London Marathon was the hottest London Marathon in history. I can't remember exactly the temperature. All I remember is at the start I was already warm. I was at the start of the race. I was just in my vest and shorts and felt this is lovely. And of course, as we all know as runners, is if you feel lovely and warm standing still, how's it going to feel when you've been running 26 miles? So I think it was already over 20 degrees at the start before it started, and then it just went up and up. So yeah, for you, how was, you say it was horrendous, but you managed to get through it. How do you keep your head together? Because for a lot of people, it gets so overwhelming that they stop and they don't finish. It's a DNF. I know some people don't finish for physical reasons, that they injure themselves or there's something wrong and they can't physically go on. But others, mentally they've given up and they stop and they cannot go any further. How did you? Because you finished, didn't you?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You got to the end. How do you keep yourself together mentally? Because the physical side, the body just keeps going. How do you keep yourself mentally? Because this podcast is all about the mental health side. Is how do you keep yourself together mentally to finish? It's a hot day. The crowds are great. The crowds always help, but they can't cool us down. They aren't walking around with buckets of ice and foaming us down. And yes, there's water every 1 mile, but the water tends to warm up once we get so. But yeah, how do you keep yourself together?
I think it's sort of similar to those sweaty, horrible long runs when you're training. It's you think about quitting, you think about how nice it would be to stop and pop into the next shop and get an ice cream and take your trainers off and let your feet swell up. But I think to myself, how do I want to feel about this later? Do I want it to be a regret, something that I use as evidence for that negative voice in my head that will then beat me up later? Or do I want to create the positive evidence that I was talking about before that shows that I can do it? And even if it's tough and it takes me all day to do it, I'll do it. And yeah, I think it's about just creating more positive evidence for myself that really helps me in the long run. If I quit and took the short-term game of ice cream and shoes off, I might be happy for 5 minutes, but that happiness wouldn't last. And there's also the element of the charity and the support that you get from the charity as well, because I did it for Blue Cross and I had a mascot. I had this little guy, Salem cat. He was strapped to my camel pack and I wore him all the way around the marathon with my ears on as well. So I had a buddy and I was talking to him by the end because I was delirious. And but this was a real talking point actually, because I had a costume or a mascot. Lots of people wanted to talk to me. So I had other runners in costumes who come up in solidarity and be like, "Oh, it's a bit hot, isn't it?" And lots of the crowd were talking to me as well. I got a few inappropriate pussy jokes, all the standard stuff that you get in London. But this was a real talking point. So it meant that I had more people to bring me out of my own head. So rather than 26 miles of grumbling to myself about how much it sucked, I had moments of that, but I also had moments of talking to really lovely people, be them other runners or be them people in the crowds, and also the charity supporters that were out. So I saw my charity at mile 19, and then I saw the Cats Protection League on the mile, and they gave me a boost as well because I had a cat. So yeah, that really helped. So all of those things combined.
Excellent. You touched on there, which I think is sometimes people miss, is when you're out training and you're doing your long runs, and training is essential. And as you said, I think listening to what you've been saying, that New York, where you didn't do the proper training and suffered, and yet London, I would say, was probably a tougher one in terms of the heat and so on. And yet because you've done the training, you had the mindset, is you got through that. So training. So top tip, guys, train properly. Train properly, and it's hours on the feet, not the distance. That's one of the things I do a mantra on. So you don't have to run 20 miles, which for some of us it might take many hours, is just get on your feet for 3 hours, maybe at the most 3.5 hours, and whatever mileage it is, that's the mileage. Don't worry about it. You've been on your feet for 3 hours, and then you can finish a marathon. Would you say that's a good point there, Sarah?
Absolutely, yeah. Do focus on time on feet, and if it sucks and if you're having a bad day and you don't want to do it, then just like talk to another runner, because we are a massive community now with us being online. We're everywhere. You can't get away from the other runners, and we're all a positive, supportive bunch. And if you join any running Facebook group, for example, and you just drop a comment in there, not feeling it today, 25 people will get on you and be like, go out, you'll love it, you'll feel better. And it'll give you that little encouragement that you need. And I think when we are depressed or down, we've all got a bit of a tendency to become more insular. That's just a depression side effect. You do tend to go into your little cocoon, but it's a trap. Don't do it. Get out, talk to people. It can be a quiet, introvert-friendly way, just talking to someone on social media. You haven't got to physically be at a running club.
Yeah.
But just talk to other runners, because we all get it.
Yeah, I mean, some of the other guests that I've had will be having members of local clubs as well. And as you said, you know, for a lot of us, most of my training, maybe a lot of your trainings, we're on our own through work or times or schedules. But it's so much more fun running with others, and sometimes, you know, the long runs. And if you join your local club, wherever it may be, or, you know, meet up with people that you know through online and go for a run with them. And as you say, sometimes we can be a bit introverted, so we might not converse as we're running, but it's great just running with someone. And obviously, if it does get a bit different, then you can start talking. That sounds brilliant. But in terms of, if you were to give, you know, going through all this and the experiences that you have, Sarah, if we were to say, what are the top tips that you'd have for helping people in terms of how they can best help themselves to be, I know that you'd mentioned that if someone's looking to run a sub 3 or anything really, I'd say whatever the time is, we need to look after ourselves both mentally and physically. What are your top tips? Some people call them hacks or whatever you want to call it. Do you have any top 3, top 4, top 5? I know I've sprung this on you. We didn't prepare this, so you know, we are winging it, so to speak. But I like it more that way, that rather than surprise you, and obviously this isn't being edited in any way, is that so I'm giving you a bit of time now to think of a few in your brain. And we've touched on a lot of them, I would say, as we've gone through the conversation on this.
Okay.
Is
3.
In summary, what would be your top 3? In summary, your top 3.
Top 3.
Top 3, Ray. We can wrap it. Yeah, you can wrap it as well if you want.
It should be the screenshot for our YouTube thumbnail. Top 3. Or maybe with the cat. I don't know. I have to get him in there somewhere.
Maybe the cat and bad jokes about pussy. But anyway,
it's going to come back to haunt me again, isn't it? Yeah.
No, but,
okay, so
go.
Number 1. My top tip, number 1, is get a mentor. And that's literally somebody outside of yourself whose opinion and perspective you trust. So they don't even have to be a runner, just someone that knows you. So my mentor is my boss. I'm so lucky, Dr. Andrea Pennington. She will frequently remind me, check yourself before you wreck yourself, because she knows how hard I train. She knows I've got a stubborn perfectionistic streak, and she knows I don't have an off switch. So she saw me burn myself out last year from running too much. I tried to run 4 marathons in a year while I was working too hard in the day job. I got burnt out after 2 and had to cancel the other 2. Okay. And like, she'll never tell me like, no, don't do it. She'll just, if she sees me going too far, she'll be like, and I know what that means. So just get someone to give you more perspective, because it's really hard to have perspective on yourself when you're in your own head. So someone who exists outside of your head that you trust to tell you, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Number 2 has left my head, so let's go to number 3. Number 3 is cats. Cats are the most excellent recovery buddies, and they are the most excellent example of self-care. So this is a puppet, but my real 3 cats that I have, I spend a lot of time chilling out with them because they're just a really good calming influence on me. I'm a very all or nothing person. I find it hard to sit and chill. I'm either doing 3 things at once, or I'm asleep. So having cats has actually helped me to find the middle ground, which leads on to recovery. Recovery is super important. Wish I could remember what I was going to say for number 2. Mentor.
Was it recovery?
No, recovery looped into number 3. Might have to put that in the comments later.
But I think
maybe it was don't beat yourself up if you choke on a podcast interview.
Exactly. It's not the end of the world, and we'll be doing a follow-up. It'd be great to have you back on as a follow-up, Sarah, because there's so much we could talk about, and obviously with those. But my key tech, having a mentor, guide, whatever you want to call it, is a brilliant tip. And I think when you say cats, you. By the way, guys, you don't have to rush out and go and buy some cats.
Dogs.
Cat or dogs. There are cat rescue places as there are dog rescue places, because I gather you have 3 cats from rescue. Is that right, Sarah? Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
So you don't, and having a pet or having someone who that you can cuddle up with and talk to, or just be with. Yeah. So I think it's allowing that. But I do love that quote of check yourself before you wreck yourself. And so you had that goal of doing 4 marathons and burnt yourself out and had to stop at 2. I think the key thing there is that, and you're back and you're refreshed and invigorated and smiling, and which is brilliant. So all I can say, Sarah, is thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge and expertise on this. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you, and those who are listening on a future podcast, probably, where we'll talk about another topic. But in the meantime, as I can say, thank you so much. If there's anything you wanted to close on, Sarah, that you wanted to say.
I think check yourself before you wreck yourself is the best way to go out. So I'm just going to drop that there and go out in style.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you everybody for listening, watching, and I'll see you all soon. Bye bye. Bye bye bye.